Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
Once again, welcome to the 12th season of Your Legislators on KRWG. I'm Glenn Cerny, and I'll take the opportunity to one more time say Happy New Year to everyone. Thrilled to have with us today Representative Yvette Herrell from District 51. And first of all, could you kind of explain what District 51 is? Because I'm not ever sure what my district is, let alone the others.
Right. Well, District 51 is actually Alamogordo, and my entire House district is outlined right in the city limits of Alamogordo.
Now, I almost feel like I should be quoting a John Denver song here. All your bags are packed, you're ready to go.
That's it.
Taxi's
That's
waiting.
It. Taxi's waiting and just...
you're at the starting line.
Starting line, yes, and excited to see what we're going to be able to accomplish up there in the next number of days. And at least it's a short session, so we know when we're going to get out, I think around, the 15th of February, but it's always a little tougher on the budget sessions, and we'll see how many bills ended up at the very end getting pre-filed and getting messages, and we'll know that as we go into opening day in the next few days.
In fact, on my sheet here, I've got budget as the first three things, because the main purpose of the short session is indeed to get a balanced budget, we should say, not just a budget, but a balanced budget.
That's right. We're constitutionally required to do that. And you know, it's an interesting thought, because over the last 8 years, during the 30-day, we are only supposed to hear budget bills and then anything germane to the budget. So maybe a tax bill or things of that nature. Sometimes the governor has allowed multiple bills to be introduced that have absolutely nothing to do with budget. It just kind of depends. And so again, at this stage, we're just still kind of waiting to see what we're going to have. A lot of bills have been pre-filed. A lot of bills have been jacketed and ready to go. So we'll have to see what transpires in the next few days.
As just about everyone in the Roundhouse is very aware, Senator John Arthur Smith was here last week, and he is known as Senator No up there.
That's exactly right.
So I was very surprised to see him with a smile on his face when he walked in, because we don't want to get too much of a drum roll here, but there is some additional funding that appears to be available. The economic outlook, what does it stand?
It's actually better than I think expected. We actually have last count, and it could have changed, as we've gotten closer. It might have changed a bit, but I think there was about $193 million worth of new money, and that's a very welcome sign, especially, we've gone into special session last year trying to find money and ways to balance the budget and to keep everything solvent. So to see any new monies coming in, new revenues, is really exciting. But we've watched over the last several months the boom down in Carlsbad and Artesia and that southeastern part of the state, which is our bread and butter. And just watching the economy on the national level, I think we're going to be headed in the right direction in terms of those revenue sources helping us in the general fund.
But I think there's also some other things that are contributing to it. You look at the boom going on in Santa Teresa. Holloman just got a new contract with the Air Force, Berlin, and the central part
We're
up
hoping,
north.
yes, and in fact that Holloman, that is, of course, in my backyard, but every single county in the state benefits from Holloman Air Force Base, from the missions, the research and development, so we're really working hard to ensure that we can handle the bed down and get the contract. And if we do, that will be a 20-year, contract with the state of New Mexico, with Holloman. But like I said, the beneficiaries are statewide. It's not just Alamogordo. It'll be Doñana County. It's every county in the state. So big, a lot of stuff happening. And of course, we continue to do well with our tourism in the state of New Mexico.
All right, with all that glee to start things off, there is a big question mark, though, and it's not really going to impact immediately this year.
Right.
But in Washington, they passed the bill for the tax reform, and there are some things that I know we have to look over our shoulders and kind of anticipate without really knowing what. I mean, you don't want to build a boogeyman about this, but there are some issues that need to be kind of watched.
Right, and with the federal tax bill being being passed, I mean, we all know that is going to help the economy in the state and in the nation. We had worked closely last fall, with the Ways and Means Committee to ensure that we were putting some protections in place for our gas and oil industry, and it looks like we'll see that protection stayed in place. That's for the new wells that will be drilled out down in the southeastern corner of the state, and up north if they end up getting their gas and oil going again, at least their oil going again. So you're right, but I feel like we're going to have the opportunity to see some change on the federal level that will be very beneficial for the state of New Mexico.
Another area of concern, you and I were talking earlier about the fact that New Mexico's 50th in child welfare, and one of those items that's kind of in question is the Children's Health Insurance Program, or the CHIP program, which needs all the help it can get in the land of enchantment.
It does, and we know there's going to be some revenues that are going to have to be pulled aside, allocated for the Medicaid expansion in general. So I think once we really get into session the next few days, so we can really start kind of peeling this onion apart and seeing, do we have the revenues? Are we going to have the funding sources available to be able to look at doing the CHIP program? And then also weighing that against some of the obligations we already have financially. So, but we need to be looking at things like this. The children's health, you mentioned earlier, here we have a state that is 50th with child welfare, 50th in so many areas, and we've got to do a better job than that, absolutely. There's just no doubt about it.
So let's get back to what you can anticipate.
Right.
and that's, okay, you've got some money, but there's also this huge, would it be incorrect to describe it as a dam that's been building up with the cutting of the budget, with the shortfalls, with the cutting of the budget, that there's so many things that you could look at and say, well, we need to do this, and somebody else is going to say, oh, but wait, we need to do this. What are you looking at as some of the things that you would hope that both parties, both houses, and the governor could come together and kind of say, let's get this done? And
we have to. I mean, and you're absolutely right. The last two sessions have been really hard because we have had shortfalls. We've had to scrape and sand money and move money and do everything we could to balance the budget. And so you're right, there's just all this pressure. But we have to make sure that we're adequately funding all the state agencies, and especially those, we haven't really looked at giving raises before in the past that were very significant. I think there's some areas we have to do that. We have to do better. We have to make sure that we have enough staff in these departments. A lot of them, we had that hiring freeze. We've got to make sure that we're staffing these agencies correctly and with the right kind of staff. As it relates to coming into the session with maybe a big tax reform idea, I know that Representative Harper has worked diligently with his tax reform policy. But it kind of made me smile when you said what you said earlier. We need tax reform in the state, just like what we saw. We needed it in the nation, now we need it in the state. But it cuts back to that, well, that's okay if you cut everybody else's, but not this one. Leave our stuff alone. And it's a job trying to collaborate, coming to the table with all the ideas and making sure that, we can make everybody happy, and it's not going to happen. And in some ways, we've gotten a little too reliant, both on the state and federal level in terms of government help and programs, but we need to fund constitutionally what we are supposed to be funding, and then we need to make sure we're taking care of our families, kids, education, and those types of things.
Now, I have to disclose two things here. First of all, I have a list of projects here to ask you about.
Okay.
But I also have to state that one of them is state pay, and I want to make sure that it's very clear that a good portion of my salary is paid by state funds. So I just disclosure on that one.
Yeah.
But it's been 6 years.
I know, and that's not right. And in fact, I also think we don't. I personally don't believe that we pay our in-classroom teachers enough. I think
that's one of the areas that education
absolutely,
is.
And we need to do a better job. I mean, it's tough when we're on these shortfalls. We really missed the mark when we were looking at our budget a few years ago, because this year going in now, when we're going into the 18 budget, we're looking at 19's. Physically,
which always
the 19
confuses me when
I know. So we're a year behind. So this 18 looks like we're going to be okay. We're looking at 19 is what budget we'll be balancing when we're in session. But we also see a little bit of sunshine on the horizon. We see a little bit of excitement in terms of some of the growth and the opportunities. But really, we need to. It's sad that we haven't given the raises and funded the departments and the state employees the way that we should or could if we had everything in line in terms of had our budget balanced, had our priorities straight, and we kind of got rid of some of the fraud and some of the overages that we don't need so that we can pay the people that are in our classrooms, in our facilities.
Well, and two of the things on my list are really coinciding
Yeah.
well. And I'll start with the mental health side of the equation.
Gosh.
But our mental health programs have been
Neglected.
reduced and just really left short-handed. And on the other side of that then is when you look at law enforcement and you look at detention and all that process, the judicial process, they go hand in hand
They
many
all
times.
go hand in hand. And you know what's unfortunate? The behavioral health, the mental health issues here, this is just me speaking, but this is the way I see it. They do go hand in hand. And when there's crises, or when the economy's down, or jobs are hard to find, people are out of work, to me, that's when we should have our facilities stellar, funded, available, because what is happening, people do desperate things when they're facing desperate situations, and then they're breaking the law in some cases, and then we're expecting our county facilities or our state facilities to rehabilitate. It's not going to happen, and so
or
we
medical
see
facilities that are
exactly, and then we see the recidivism. New Mexico needs to invest in New Mexicans, and part of that is getting back to some of the programs and some of the help that we could provide, the behavioral health. But you're right, all this goes hand in hand. The district attorney's offices. I know in my county, our district attorney is faced with having to make big decisions, and when I say that, I mean having witnesses come in on some of these high-profile cases, versus taking care of 5 other cases that are a little less high-profile, because we don't have the funding to bring in the kind of tools and witnesses and specialists we need to fight these crimes. And that you're right. To me, the jails, the detention, the DA's offices, all this, it's just one big ball, if you will, and there's just pieces that fit together in that, and we've got to do a better job.
Here in Las Cruces, we had a judge leave the bench to work for Doña Ana County.
Right. And one thing we could do in the state, and we've had this conversation in the state many times, but the return to work policy would be helpful, beneficial as it relates to law enforcement, as it relates to bringing in men and women that are retiring with 20 years, say, with the state police, so they are vested in the state. We've put a lot of money into these law enforcement officers, their training, etc. If they want to retire from one community and move to another and maybe work part-time, that is such a benefit to retain that experience. It's helpful for the smaller communities like Alamogordo or Tularosa, some of the outlying communities, and it wouldn't hurt to be able to have return to work available for Albuquerque. Just with last year, the crime rates they had, the shortages they had. So, these are just common sense things that we could do in New Mexico that would help all of our communities.
Let's linger a little longer on the judicial side of things, because the changes in bail are an issue and a continuing conversation. And how do you see that playing out? How do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, that's in the weeks leading up to coming into this session, I had started receiving a number of emails from just community members, not necessarily just from Alamogordo, but statewide, because the concern they have that it's unfortunate, but it was a constitutional amendment that was passed last year, and people did not understand the implications. And I was opposed to it. We held it up in our committee as long as we could, and then we finally found some common ground. We came to a compromise, so I did vote for it. In fact, everybody voted for it when it crossed the House. But even still, I was opposed to it on the ballot. It is giving the judges some discretion that these criminals are not necessarily going into jail, so they may be arrested and then immediately released. But what it did, it's had a huge impact on, I think, public safety, but it also had a huge impact on our bail bond industry in the state. And I know one of ours that has been in the state for years they were closing their doors, trying to get everything wrapped up, just a couple of weeks ago at the first of the year. And that's unfortunate that we passed legislation again, it's the lack of communicating and understanding, and people did not know what they were voting for on the ballot, and it sounded good when you read it, but truly it was, it wasn't, and it was a mixed bag. I mean, I opposed it. I know Senator Martinez opposed it. You know, it was Democrats, Republicans for it and against it. But the public, you know, when you put a constitutional amendment out there and people aren't educated, it's sometimes difficult to look at the outcome. And we've been pushed to try to change it. I don't know how that's going to look in this session or if we will.
Well, and one of the issues with the short session, you mentioned it earlier, is the governor should be presenting a number of things, priorities, if you will, that she would like to see work on. But beyond that, it's tough to work in new things, and one of them that you and I have been talking about is tax reform. Yeah. Is that possible with such a short time to seriously look at it?
And that's, you know, I know, again, Representative Harper has worked on that, and here's what's interesting about that tax reform bill. In 2017, in our 60-day session, it passed through the House unanimously. Or just about unanimously. I mean, it had a lot of support. Then when of course, it didn't make any traction in the Senate. Then when we got back to the special session, when we were really probably needing to really take a look at this, and I'm sure it had an emergency clause, meaning if it passed both chambers and the governor signed it, it would go immediately into effect. It was a complete fight, and it didn't get out of the House. And so it just, ideas, things change very quickly. And so I think it might not get introduced, or if it does, it might not get pushed through. And that's, you know, 30 days is not very much time. And depending on how much work they did on it in the interim, I don't sit on the tax interim committees, and I didn't, this bill didn't go to any of the committees I sit on in the interim, so I'm not sure what the final product looked like, or if he got any kind of endorsement from a committee.
You know, and I've been doing these now for 12 years, and I would be hard-pressed to tell you a conversation I've had with a legislator that it doesn't eventually come to education.
Yeah.
And I found it a little interesting, and we've just said it's going to be difficult to get any new bills in, but the Albuquerque Journal, Dan Boyd had an article on Nate Gentry, the GOP floor leader, proposing a plan for high school graduating. In order to qualify for graduating, you had to apply to a college, didn't say get
accepted.
Trade school, military, but something. And it may seem a little altruistic, but I think behind it lies the deal of how do we get our workforce and our young people into a position where they can be hired into better paying jobs.
Right. And you know what, and I understand, I'm passionate for that sentiment. I get it, and it's true. And I think everybody wants to see our graduation rates higher. They want our our kids to come out of high school prepared and ready, whether they go to college or trade school or work. And we're failing miserably in some areas. And I think it's just, we're all concerned. And I think this idea of, okay, you have to do A, B, or C in order to graduate. I understand the sentiment. I really do. I just think, again, we've got opportunities that we can provide the students without having to put that type of a mandate. We talked earlier, you know, we've got some of the programs, the dual credit. We've got the program with
which has been very strong here at New Mexico State and Doña Ana County, the community colleges, and so it works.
And it works over in Alamogordo too. I mean, it's very helpful. But we've got the apprenticeship programs. You know, that those programs were very popular years ago, and we've kind of gotten away from them. And what we need to do is be thinking about connecting the schools with the apprenticeship programs, so that these high school students can come out of school with you know, experience or ready to go to a trade, you know, whether it's masonry. I was really impressed to learn that the apprenticeship programs have grown and have changed. I mean, it's not just iron and steel, you know, it's medical, it's technology, it's masonry, it's so many different areas. And there are going to be times when I think we can utilize these programs, you know, kind of put them all together. Let's see how everything cross-pollinates to give our juniors and seniors specifically more options.
Well, the one that I always enjoy talking to is Ag Secretary Whitty. We always seem to overlook our agricultural.
We do.
And I mean, you think of the economic impact, but there's
huge.
another area that if you could partner with local farmers, the factories.
To do an internship or some type of an apprentice program, you know, now I will admit I don't know all the apprentice programs, but if there's one that is ag related, perfect fit for this community, perfect fit for a lot of our rural communities. So, I mean, I just think I think it'll be interesting to see what Representative Gentry ends up doing with this, or if he just threw it out there as an idea. I don't know how much traction it'll get. It's an interesting concept. I get the sentiment of it, but I still think we have opportunity with the apprenticeship programs, with the dual credit, with, you know, looking at our education system a little bit with a little bit broader eyesight to see what are we missing that we could be doing that's inexpensive. I mean, these programs, the apprenticeship program is something we could bring in and get the kids engaged, at the schools engaged in, and be very effective for both the apprenticeship program itself and the school.
You do know I'm required being on the land grant institution too. President Carruthers would
right.
be happy if I didn't bring
That's
up
right.
the egg part of it. Something I find a little unusual, and obviously the sexual harassment issue is just a national conversation right now, and I'm going to kind of mix in because I think every year we talk about ethics in the State House as well, and this year there's actually a vote taking place on the day before the session starts on the issue.
We're all required, and we always have to go up and take a class, an ethics class, but this year we're all required to take it, and obviously the emphasis will be on the sexual harassment and some of the bullying. And you'll remember last year, you know, that nationally there were a lot of stories about that, and then I think November, December, you know, Representative Fajardo brought a few things out, and then we had one of our lobbyists that brought a story to light that a lot of people didn't know about. So, yeah, it's kind of died down a little bit right here in the right when the holidays hit. But as we go into session, and we will have those classes that they're going to be mandatory. So, and they're looking at new policy. So yes, there'll be a vote, but there's been a lot of comments in both caucuses, I'm sure, about the policy.
Let me ask you a different kind of question here, but we're in the situation that a year from now we'll be looking at a very different House and governor, and you're part of this equation running for District 2 congressional seat. Right. Is there going to be any different kind, I don't know how to explain it, a hue or a tenor that's a little different with this pending change of a governor leaving, and the House, the Senate is not up for election, so the Senate will remain fairly
everything stays
static.
The Senate. I think that you're going to see, I think, a very robust election cycle, because it's a very important seat for the governor's seat. It's a very important, you know, obviously the Republicans will be trying to hold every seat they have and potentially take on a couple extra seats. Of course, the Democrats want to make sure that they hold their seats and hopefully take a couple extra, but the big key at the end of the day is the redistricting. And that's where everybody, you know, a lot of maybe the listeners or the viewers aren't thinking about that, maybe don't understand that process, but that redistricting process is huge, because that draws, of course, our lines for House and Senate seats, the congressional seats, and that will determine really the color, if you will, of our House or our Senate. And I think we're also looking at our economy in the state. People, by and large, are tired of being 50th at most everything. We know we have a great state. We know we have the potential and the natural resources and the ability to be better than what we are currently. And so I think we're going to see an emphasis, especially, I think, as we see the nation, you know, the growth there, the stock markets, the manufacturing jobs. I mean, the things that are happening nationally, I think New Mexico will see itself kind of leaning to the place of, hey, we want to be part of that. We want to reap those benefits. We want to be a part of that. And I think we're going to, it's very important to see what happens over the next 18 months in this state.
We've got about a minute to go, but by the power invested in me as the moderator of your legislatures, I can grant you one wish.
Okay.
So if we were to get back here on the 17th of February,
right?
What would you say? I wish we were, or I'm pleased that I wished for this and I got this out of the session.
Out of this session, I would hope that we would get
The powers don't go that far into the future.
right. I will hope that we really get a budget. I mean, a real budget passed without taking money out of the programs, and that we would really truly work on those reserve accounts, because that's really the future. That has such an impact on how New Mexico can do business in the state, I mean, in the country, globally. We need to really be thinking about why we're in session this 30 days, and it is the budget session. So we need to be thinking about putting New Mexico first, getting our obligation out of the way, which is the budget, and making sure that when we have the ability to do so, we're taking care of our New Mexico employees and our departments so that they can do their jobs right.
I want to thank you, because I mean, it's a very busy time, and for you to come over from Alamogordo to join us here, like
Happy
I
to
said,
do it.
I know the bags are packed and you got 2 days, but Representative Herrell, thank you so much for
You're
joining
welcome.
us on
You're
your
welcome.
legislators, and I invite you to join us when the session gets going in earnest this week, because we'll be back with another session report on your legislators. I'm Glenn Cerny. Please enjoy your weekend.